Hello and welcome to our podcast. I am joined here with Klayton Bolin and Kasen, and I am Carson Sims. Klayton, would you like to get us started on talking about First Reformed?
Yes, I would like to ask why the director had so many scenes with little cuts, like long scenes where it just show him and just no cut in the action.
I think that it really helps us. It helps with the feeling of despair that the movie, really, that's one of the main things about it is this feeling of despair that Toller constantly has. And I think just having the camera never move, it almost feels like he's stuck. It just doesn't move, and he's stuck in this feeling of the world is terrible and the world's dying, whatever. Another thing I thought about this movie that goes around with the camera, they didn't use much camera movement, and I thought that was interesting because it kind of lets the viewer look in at little details that the camera doesn't force them what to look at. The viewer gets to decide what to look at. I think it makes it more interesting as a film.
Yeah, I think going along with helping viewer engagement, I think that the no camera movement helps with making it more feel realistic, and especially the aspect ratio is kind of like a square format, and it's I don't know, it feels more personal than some of the shots they're really zoomed in, and it makes you feel more personal than just a regular aspect ratio. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd happen to agree with Carson. I think it adds a lot to the realism because it feels like you're in that scene with in those scenes with Reverend Toller and some of the other characters. And I think it adds to how isolated and vulnerable he is throughout the movie, and it just builds on the fact how he just goes down this dark path of struggle a lot. And I think it makes the audience feel like they're in the room with them as well. I think that those long scenes, especially with the conversation he had with the one lady at the church cafe, I think that added a lot to the realism of everything.
Okay, very interesting. My question is, what does Mary symbolize in Reverend Toller's life?
I know Kasen's we had a conversation about her symbolizing God and the light of God, but I think she just symbolizes she's an element of change, I guess. She incites change onto people. So anybody that comes into contact with her, especially our main character, it may not be that she is the light of God or she is God, but that she just shows change and makes change.
I would happen to agree with Carson. I think that is a good point, but I think me and Kasen agreed on the fact that there are a lot of similarities to her and God and the stuff that's mentioned in the Bible and stuff like that, because one Christian-based belief is that you see God at the end of your life, and at the end of his life after he killed himself, he was shown with Mary, and that kind of symbolizes God. And he also, if she doesn't symbolize God, I think she definitely symbolizes at least hope and life. But I really do think she symbolizes God because there's the one scene where she kind of breathes life into him, and that's in a very interesting scene. I think that is a good example of her being a symbol of God, and she's also kind of his rock and someone he can kind of confide in, which is another example of her being a symbol of God.
Yeah, going off that, we had this discussion in the other class yesterday, but I think one of the things I think is that points to this, her being hope or whatever, is that it seems like whenever Toller has something bad happen in his life or he goes through a rough time, that she is always there to pick him up. So the one I think of is when they're in the cafe with the pastor of the megachurch and the energy executive, the energy guy goes off on him and tells him, you know what you're talking about, whatever, and Toller is clearly very upset by that. The next cut we see is Mary and Toller riding bikes together. So it's almost like she's the one that always brings him back whenever he has a rough time.
Okay, moving on. My question is, how does the film tackle the feeling of despair?
I think showing the isolation and alone feeling shows a different side of the despair that people may have, and I also think it shows how consuming it is, because you just see in all the scenes how consuming the despair Reverend Toller had. how prevalent it was. Even in the one scene where he was talking about slaves to the kids, I mean, him trying to be kind and uplifting to these kids, you could just see him struggling through it because he just felt this feeling of death and despair and all that stuff. And the additional source I found by Marquette University kind of talked about priests and how they struggle with mental health sometimes, and I think this can be applied to Reverend Toller because it says that mental health is influenced by his vocational satisfaction, which I don't think he had very much of. I don't think he was very satisfied with his current work as a reverend. And it also talks about mental health being influenced by the support of superiors and peers. And although he did have a lot of support from Mary, the other people in his life from the church wasn't quite as supportive they were supportive in almost a fake way. And I think Reverend Toller definitely went through a lot of these mental struggles, and I think a lot of priests do as well.
Yeah, I like what you talk about with the fake thing, like the megachurch. But one thing I noticed about this film is that it seems like the entire thing has like very muted colors, where it's all like grays and whites and blacks, except when they're in the church, like the megachurch, like Abundant Life. And it's like there's all these colors everywhere compared to the rest of it where there's none. I think that kind of shows that like the false hope that the mega churches give people, which is what I did for my source. It talks about how they call it a prosperity gospel, where they preach to these people that you have to give money to the church and you have to be financially successful in order to love God. And that really, it's the way that they manipulate people into giving them money, which is also why I think that, like I said, with the colors, it's like this, it's hope that they give people as opposed to all the despair in the film, but it's not real. It's all fake. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think false hope and despair in general are like, that's the only thing you see in this movie. Like, you don't see anything hopeful at all. Like, you could argue that Mary is a symbol of hope, and that he provides like support to Mary, but it's just like they're just trying to cope with the death and the despair. And you could argue that when he lays on top of her, like that scene, like, I mean, it'd kind of be weird to say it's a happy scene, but it's not. I mean, it's just they're just coping with the despair and the death that's happening in the film. And I think the effect of like this movie being a slow burner really adds to that. Like, if a movie's about despair and it's fast, it's quick, it doesn't compare to this where it's nothing but despair. And I want to talk about my source for a minute, which is about involvement with religious groups in debates over climate change, which from what I read, like the biggest thing I got out of that was that it's taken place over like since like the 70s. Like, it's happened for a really long time. So this isn't just something that like is just coming up now because of climate change. It's just all the environmental things that churches have been involved in, and politics as well, that churches have been involved in through the years. I thought that was interesting. Okay, we can go to final thoughts now, Klayton.
I really enjoyed this movie, especially towards the end. Like, the last 45 minutes were really interesting, and although there wasn't a lot of true like action and like heavy stuff going, I mean, there was heavy stuff, but not a lot of things going on per se in the first couple hours of the film. But they really left a lot of clues, and it really picked up towards the end, and the ending scenes were just fantastic, and I really enjoyed it.
I thought I was into it from start to finish. Like, they were saying that this is like a slow burn and stuff. I didn't get that at all. Like, I was in it the entire time. So I thought this was a really good movie. Yeah.
I don't. There's some slow burns that I really don't like. This one I also didn't really like from the start. Like, at the start of the movie, like the first 30 minutes, 45 minutes were not it for me. But I'll agree with Klayton. It did pick up towards the end. Pretty solid film. I want to thank you guys for watching, and we'll catch you in no next one, because this is our last podcast. That's so sad. Thank you, and have a good night.